I did not see that. A lot of moves, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Denver receiver, I've never heard of him.
I hadn't either, but they said pro football, he graded out top 10 in the preseason. Now, my first thing that comes to my mind though is, well, none of the good receivers played in the preseason, first time. So, but of the guys that did play, he did well. And they said he had a hell of a camp, and they're loaded, that's why he was available. So, he would have only been there before, because he got 2 studs.
As long as these guys, and
He
that's
could
not
be a
in
guy.
their view.
So I'm doing 2 guys, so I like some of those scrappy guys.
Well, anything's better than what they have. It also shows they were counting the firemen a lot.
They were. The 2 million guarantee. That's good.
Yeah, no, I like what I see. You know, well, now, the one thing is this kid Burrows. The kid, the linebacker from
Barnes.
Barnes, yeah, that's his.
From Purdue, yeah.
From Purdue. He's good.
He looks like the best player.
He's fast.
He makes plays, he's instinctive, you know.
See, that's gonna be, they found.
Do you want this out?
Yeah.
Okay, so I can move it, so I'll have to pull it out for the end of the conference, but that's gonna be no filming, no.
Okay, good.
Now, he's just busy.
Thank you.
Switching over and not.
Is Beth sitting there? Sorry?
As far as I know, no one.
Okay.
As far as I know, no one's sitting there.
Okay, then can we remove?
Oh, I'm sorry, no, I'm sorry, John, I thought you meant there. Correct,
Is she
John.
referring to him or something?
John's sitting there.
Correct.
Or at least pushing.
So,
At least they're trying to send the quarterback instead of setting the
Sorry? No, I know, but is there reason he had a diagram?
yes.
Okay.
This I mean, you couldn't figure out why the offensive line was moving this way, and then the run going back that way.
Betsy, are you in the shop too?
Yes, there are gonna be a number of people.
Okay.
Yes.
I don't know that.
I know, I understand, no, I get it.
No, no,
Yes, someone is.
How about if I'll split up the team that way? So obviously, Andy's left.
not a usual.
We're gonna take off our minutes.
You don't want to trouble.
They got it, Chris.
Maybe not do that.
Does anybody pick up?
Some people, I'm sure.
just next to her. Some of you can be behind John and the rest of you.
Just stand up.
Great.
Nobody's excited to be in the,
Well, you know.
on the shot.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming to the press conference today. My name is David Williams. I'm the Chief Assistant Prosecutor at the Prosecutor's Office. We're going to start today with remarks from the prosecutor. She'll take some questions, and then at the end of the conference, we're going to show you some video that cannot be recorded. So all cameras and audio recording are going to have to be off, but we'd like you to be able to see the video.
All right. Good morning. Thank you all for being here. I'm here this morning because the Special Prosecutor, Beth Greenberg-Morrow, has issued her report and recommendation in the Juwan Deering case. After 3 months and 300 hours and a thorough review of all reports, files, transcripts, and evidence, and conducting her own investigation in conjunction with the Michigan State Police, she is recommending that Juwan Deering's conviction and sentence be vacated. As most of you already know, 5 children died in a house fire in Royal Oak Township on April 6, 2000. It was a terrible loss for the entire community, but the loss their parents experienced is unimaginable. 6 years after the fire, this office charged Juwan Deering with arson and murder. Those charges were based in large part on the testimony of 3 jailhouse informants. Those informants testified at the trial, and Juwan Deering was convicted and sentenced to life without parole. When I took office earlier this year, I was contacted by the Michigan Innocence Clinic and advised that they were planning to file a habeas corpus petition in federal court based on the allegation that the arson science used to convict Juwan Deering was outdated and inaccurate. When I reviewed the trial file, I found a letter written by one of the informants to the trial prosecutor asking for favors. This was alarming to me, and I immediately ordered a review of all the files where the informants had been charged with crimes by this office. In those files, there was important information that was not disclosed to the defense and that the jury never heard. I discovered that 2 of the jailhouse informants had been used multiple times by law enforcement and prosecutors, including multiple times by this office. One of the jailhouse informants had been used more times than he could count. The jury never heard any of that. Those informants were given plea bargains, their sentences were reduced, sometimes by many years, or their cases were outright dismissed for the cooperation before and after the Deering trial, and the jury never heard that. When I found that information, I immediately notified and turned it over to Mr. Deering's attorneys and asked that a special prosecutor, an independent special prosecutor, be appointed to investigate this case. What the special prosecutor found is extremely troubling. There was important information in our files and the investigation files that was not given to Mr. Deering's attorney before the trial. That information included a videotaped interview of one of the children who survived the fire. In the video, the child describes what he saw and heard on the night of the fire. He describes hearing someone on the front porch of the house, and he describes hearing the person's voice. What we discovered is that there were 2 parts of this interview, and no one had ever seen the second part until this investigation started. In the newly discovered footage, the child is shown a photo lineup, and he identifies a person named Juwan in the lineup, and he says that Juwan didn't do it. No one in my office and none of Mr. Deering's attorneys had ever seen or heard about this photo lineup and this investigation. The jury never saw or heard any of that. As prosecutors, we have an ethical obligation to turn over all the evidence, regardless of whether it's exculpatory or inculpatory. We have to do the right thing, even if it hurts our case. That didn't happen here. There was critical information that was not turned over to the defense, and the jury never heard. That injustice doesn't just impact Juwan Deering. My office contacted the parents of these children who died and told them what we found and what it meant. They've lived with this tragedy for 2 decades, and I can't imagine the pain of having to relive it again and again. In our system of justice, the Constitution protects all of us. It gives everyone the right to a fair trial. The special prosecutor found that Juwan Deering did not get a fair trial, and she's right. She has recommended that his conviction and sentence be vacated, and I agree with her. I'm committed to doing the right thing, and this is the right thing in this case. During this process, I consulted with many other professionals, including experts in prosecutorial ethics, other elected prosecutors throughout the state, both Republicans and Democrats, and I also met with every attorney in my office. The individuals standing behind me and to the right and the left are my chiefs and of divisions in this office. They have devoted their entire life as career prosecutors and have spent their life in public service. I am proud to lead such an extraordinary group. They are equally troubled by these violations and are committed to making sure this does not happen again. I expect Mr. Deering's attorneys to file a motion this week asking the Circuit Court Judge Jeffrey Mattis to vacate Mr. Deering's conviction and sentence. I will join them in that request because it's the right thing to do. It is important for the public to know what happened. So I am releasing the special prosecutor's report and recommendation, which includes a copy of the photo lineup and other documents. The video I just discussed will be part of the motion filed by Mr. Deering's attorneys. And I can take questions if you have them.
Madam Prosecutor, is it your belief then that there has been a systemic issue of lack of disclosure from this office?
It is fact that there was in this case, and the special prosecutor's also investigating other cases that involved these informants. And I, upon learning of this, immediately adopted mandatory ethics training. I met with every single attorney in this office. We went through the entire file and explained how this happens and the danger of not turning over what's necessary. I also have made a policy that no one can use a confidential informant without personal consent from me. So the answer to your question is, I certainly hope not, but we are taking steps so that this does not continue.
Is there a notion that perhaps your predecessor was lax in this regard?
You know, I think the entire country has come a long way in 20 years in terms of how we approach prosecution, how we approach law enforcement. And in this case was charged outside of the normal protocols in our office. They're there for a reason. We charge individuals in this office through the warrants division, and our chief, Jason Pernick, supervises that. In this case, it was denied at least 3 times from 2000 to 2006, and only written and charged because the trial prosecutor actually charged it, which is not in keeping with what our protocols are, and shows that we need to adhere to those protocols. They're there for a reason.
What more can you tell us about the people that investigated this case and prosecuted this case at the time and where they are now and what could happen to them?
Well, I immediately, because it's my duty to do so, filed a grievance with the prosecutor who tried this case and informed his employer at the time, which was the Attorney General, and who I'm aware took swift action. The detective, one of the detectives, is still currently at the Sheriff's Department, I'm told.
What do you think should happen next for Mr. Deering? Do you think he should be released from prison?
I'm aware that the Innocence Clinic and his attorneys are going to ask the judge that he be granted bond. I'm not taking a position on that at this point. We have pretrial services who looks at whether or not that's in the best interest of the public, and I will rely on that investigation and not comment on it until it's complete.
Do you think he'll be tried again?
At this point, all I know is that he didn't get a fair trial. And I'm going to wait and determine whether or not there is anything to try Mr. Deering once the Michigan State Police conclude their investigation.
Does this reopen the case to further investigation to see if you can find the killer?
The Michigan State Police is investigating this right now.
With the MSP investigating, is there any allegations of criminal wrongdoing by people who are involved at this point?
That's a good question. My job isn't to investigate. My job is to look over cases that law enforcement agencies bring to me.
The term ethical came up a lot, but is there legal, is there criminal activity here?
Again, that's a very good question. It's too early for me to state whether or not I think a crime was committed. I'm focusing here today just on what happened in this office, and what I know is that this office is responsible for prosecutorial misconduct.
For those of us who aren't legally, are there like 2, 3, 4 different outcomes, and what are they? What happens or could happen from here?
For Mr. Deering?
Yes, in this case.
Well, Mr. Deering could be retried again, if that is the decision that we make. He could also be exonerated. The case could be just dismissed and not tried again. There's a lot of options. And again, I'm not prepared to take a position on that. Yes?
You mentioned other cases that these informants may have been involved in. Can you give us an idea of how many cases, and is your office reviewing those cases at this time for possible convictions that also there might be questions raised about?
Right. Yes, the answer to that is yes. We know that at least 2 other homicides, 2 of these informants testified in, and that those also involve the same detective. So we are duty-bound to take a look at those convictions. And I certainly hope that we don't find anything else that was unethical or misconduct. But again, that's my responsibility is to look into that.
Have you had a chance to speak with Sheriff Bouchard about this particular detective, and is there going to be any further look into his practices?
I sat down with Sheriff Bouchard and the undersheriff in May when we discovered all this before, I made it public. And he's indicated that he will do his own investigation. With regard to what's happening currently, that's a question for Sheriff Bouchard.
You're going to be starting a conviction integrity unit, and you requested the funding to do that. Is this case indicative of the fact that there's a need for a conviction integrity unit really in every county?
I believe so. Not every county has the resources to devote a whole unit to that, but we know that a certain percentage of convictions in this country are wrongful convictions, and don't rely on me. That's established fact.
You're promising to show us a video that we're not allowed to record. Why show us the video if we can't show it?
I think it's important in full, just to make a full disclosure and be transparent about that second part of the video that we didn't even know existed until about a month ago. We don't want to show the actual, at the time, child's face out of respect to that individual. But I do believe, and so do the people standing behind me and next to me, that we have a duty to be completely transparent. And that when you don't reveal that there was a photo ID lineup just days after the fire, and the person charged with that crime never sees it, and the prosecution, from what we can tell, never saw it, we have to make it public.
Have you had a chance to ask that person who was a child then if they stand behind what they said then today?
I have not, but again, I'm not doing the investigation. This office doesn't investigate, the Michigan State Police does.
Over beyond the ethical responsibilities of your office, do transcripts reflect that at trial, the defense attorney asked any of these informants if they had been promised anything in exchange for their testimony? Which this is pretty routine for most of us that have covered trials before. Do you know if that took place?
What I can say is that was ineffectively posed and shut down immediately by an objection, and then was never pursued again. So it was, in my opinion, woefully inadequate, but the answers were very clear from the detectives and then the prosecutor, stating they never received anything, they were never promised anything, they weren't going to get anything. And the problem with that is that by 2006, we know that there was already deals that had been made, charge amendments, noting in our files due to the help with the Royal Oak Township fire.
Prosecutor, when our viewers listen to this, some of them might be wondering, why would a detective do this? Why would a prosecutor do this? Any idea what was going on at the time?
You know, I'm not here to accuse anybody of anything. That is not what this is about. In fact, it's really the last thing I want to do. But I think what we know from the data is that when you break protocol, when you decide that there is a suspect and ignore all the evidence that might lead to having exculpated that suspect, it's dangerous. And I think the fact that in our warrants division at the time, the case was denied, I believe at least 3 times, that we have those protocols for a reason, and they should have been followed. I do want to say that this has been a very difficult process for myself, but the people standing next to me, because many of the prosecutors in this office were there at the time, and they granted those charge amendments and dismissals and plea bargains, and knew nothing of the fact that that was never disclosed to the jury and wouldn't be. So it's a lack of a centralized list of somebody using a confidential informant, which is why we have the new protocol in place. But this is a dark day for this office, and I think all of us have really struggled with it, and we are committed to making sure this just never happens again.
Would those denials that you talked about by the detective or any of the informants amount to perjured testimony in court? And if so, will you possibly pursue charges of perjury on any of those people?
There's an ongoing investigation. I don't investigate. That's not before me at the moment. And, you know, it's a good question. I just don't have the answer to that.
Thank you.
Okay, so I can put the video up on the screen, but again, all recording has to be turned off. So if you'll confirm you've done that, I will then get the